Hello and welcome to Reduce CO2 Now. In this presentation, we are looking at CO2 capture and storage. So, capturing CO2 out of the air and storing it. And here we're looking especially at the technology of biomass burial. So, doing something against CO2 in the whole world so that on a global scale, CO2 is reduced in the atmosphere. There's just only four real levers there. And the first of all is like you make energy prices, the fossil fuel prices much higher, or you restrict the amount of fossil fuels which can be used. And usually, when you increase the price of something, the usage goes down. So that's like one thing. The second thing is what we are looking here in this presentation is returning carbon back into the ground. It's really simple. We took the stuff, black stuff, burned it. We have to bring green stuff back into the ground. The other area is like, in general, reforesting the planet. So planting forests. Currently, the world is losing forests. So we are deforesting the planet. We have to get up more forests. And then we have the whole area of food and diet, because there's like a lot of things also with methane, which is done by, for example, when you eat a lot of red meat, and all humans would eat a more plant-based diet, we can like also reforest much of the world. So they're like the areas, and here in this presentation, we are looking at lever number 2, returning carbon into the ground. So the system view actually really is quite simple. You see there, this small diagram there on the left side is that CO2 in the atmosphere is rising all the time, and the rate of increase is becoming greater. So to do something against CO2 in the atmosphere, there's only like two ways. We have to like reduce the CO2 emissions, so the stuff we took, coal, oil, and gas, or we are taking coal, oil, and gas. We take it from the ground and we burn it. So we take carbon from the ground, get it into the atmosphere. So we can try to reduce the amount of total global CO2 emissions. And on the other side, we can increase the rate how CO2 is brought back into the ground, so stored into the ground. And there are some people who say, hey, you are going to use technology, which isn't really wise. We can make another presentation about that thing. But that what is really there to get CO2 out of the air is photosynthesis and plants. So they produce wood and biomaterials. And we are looking now, how can we get CO2 back into the ground using biomass? So plants are absorbing CO2 from the air. They use photosynthesis and they produce biomass. And now there's like, we say 3 different versions here, how we can store biomass in the ground. First, the first one is where you take like basically physical form. You take like wood and biomass, make a hole in the ground and like cover this. And if you don't do that, all this biomass is going to decay. It's going to, just become CO2 again and go into a natural cycle. So we are like changing this, because you make a hole in the ground, cover this, and then instead of like 10 years decay of a tree in a rainforest, it takes now maybe hundreds or thousands of years for the material to decay. And there's like these 3 versions here. It could be like an industrial type of activity. It could be like really simple, low-tech version for humans, or we could make this in a liquid form and then pump it into the ground. And like the first ones are like comparatively like taking coal from the ground, so black carbon, burning it. Here we would take green carbon and put it back into the ground, and like using oil, extracting oil, burning it. Here would be like take biomass, liquefy it in the sense that you have a viscosity to put this back into the ground and then pump it back into the ground. Actually storing CO2 in a gas form in the ground, really dangerous. That's why most of these other absorption technologies don't really work. So this here is biomass burial, and especially like you can of course take any kind of plant material. You can also you would be cutting down wood. In the best sense, you start with using dead wood, so dead trees which are already dead, they're not live anymore. So they would otherwise decay and decompose, and that's emitting CO2 again. That's like the natural cycle, and we are changing this natural cycle. That's why this actually works. is you just make a big hole in the ground, you throw in all kinds of dead wood, then you cover it in a way that that stuff is there protected. And again, it's not going to get stored for millions of years in there, really, but it's going to give us enough time if these trees and material, instead of decaying in like 10 years, it's going to decay over hundreds or thousands of years. So that is going to make a difference in the CO2 in the world. It just has to be done really on a global scale. What we are doing right now is that, for example, we have research ongoing in this area, and for example, a bachelor's thesis, which we are working on. So what is really interesting is biomass burial low-tech solution. So the other one you have seen there, like a crane kind of digger machine, the industrial type of activity. But of course, that could be done in an absolute low-tech function, just by a person having something like a shovel, digging a hole, collecting dead wood, putting it back into the ground. And then what makes it really interesting to sell this in sort of a carbon credit. And just like some figures here, you see like 1 ton of dry wood is going to have something like, let's say, 0.5 tons of carbon, which is 1.8 tons equivalent of CO2. Yeah? So it's 1 ton of wood, half a ton of carbon, and then you get like the oxygen there. And so you have like 1.8 tons of CO2. Now, there's different wood densities from something like redwood, 450 kilograms per cubic meter, to I think it's teak, 1080 is one of the hardest woods, most densest wood types. So you have something like between 500 and 1,000 kilograms per cubic meter. That means that's for something like 1 ton of CO2 is roughly 1 cubic meters of dry wood. So you just need to dig a hole for that. And why is this attractive? Well, just that we have several billion people on this planet, and we have like roughly 1 billion people who are in the area of 100 euro or less per month in their earnings. So roughly like 800 million people is said to earn 100 euros or less per month. And just like if such a person would be able to do like a project to like take that wood, put it in the ground, and then sell this service somehow to, let's say, Europe, United States, and so on, so all over the world, that you are actually doing an active carbon sequestration project on a very low scale. You just need like a smartphone or so to make this work. You document your work and you bring some proof that you actually have done it. And our concept is to have something like eBay for carbon credits. So this is our long-term vision for software development, to have something like eBay for carbon credits. Of course, if you get the large eBay, which is only selling products, to like sell these kind of services here, that would be like very good as well, because what we want to have is to provide make a system where unskilled people don't really need anything. They can just take a shovel, start doing this kind of project, and then get paid globally for this. And yeah, that's the vision. It's really like you see there, it's really simple. And of course, you can use in modern technology like AI to verify this. You could use satellite imagery to verify that the thing is really there and so on, so that there's no fraud. And trust is very important. On the other hand, like a lot of projects around the world who are like promising something like carbon credits, there's a lot of fraud going on and trust is missing. And so that's what is really necessary, that there are people like small, medium enterprises, single persons, or maybe group of people doing something like this and can sell their carbon credit. Really very good, very simple, low tech. So the next solution is liquid biomass storage, because the first ones are actually like physical form. Yeah, but we have, of course, extracted oil from the ground. So geologists know how to extract oil. They know how to find the formations where there's usually oil present. But oil is only present in certain areas of the world, like in the Middle East or in the United States, and so on. So they are like these oil fields. But these formations where oil could exist are quite common. And so this is like an area where instead of like taking something from there, which is like sealed, you can pump back into something, like into the ground, into such a geological formation that you can pump something in there. It's basically what the people are doing with the fracking technology. Yeah. So, and how would you do that? You would take biomass, all kinds of biomass, what you don't need. Of course, you're not putting the food down there, but like, see a small truck there showing that you collect some biomass. And then you take the biomass, and instead of like putting it on the field where it's again decaying, you're going to take it and put it back into the ground by doing some processing here. Basically would be adding water, mixing, blending it in a form that you get a viscosity that the stuff can be pumped into the ground. And that is definitely a more complex. It's not a high-tech solution, really. It's like really simple technology, collecting, mixing, pumping. So that's not like rocket science, but definitely something what not a single individual somewhere in a low income country would be doing, but that could be done in industrial countries as well. And of course, it can be done all over the world, but would be maybe a whole village or town or so would be doing something like this. Also, what could be done there is like some people saying, hey, we have something like Azolla, like plants you can have in the water, which are which are growing very fast, and you could use that kind of stuff, harvest it, and then pump it into the ground. And President Trump some years ago was saying that like they have very little wildfires. I think it was in Finland. And then he said, yeah, the Finns, they are like harking or like they are collecting or they're like cleaning up the forests, which I don't think the Finns are actually doing. Yeah. But hey, it's basically would be something like this. You just like want to collect biomass, which otherwise is going to decay. You want to collect that stuff and put it in the ground so that the natural cycle of decay and growth is used for this. And we are like changing this cycle. If you go to the Keeling curve, where you can see that during the year, the CO2 is going up and down. And that's like really why this kind of biomass stuff is going to work on a global scale. Because you see that like in the curve is going up and down, and that largely depends on the cycle we have in the northern hemisphere, summer and winter. In summer, a lot of activity. In summer, lots of stuff is growing, so the CO2 level is reduced. And in the winter time, then all the autumn, winter, then leaves are falling down and decaying. So there's like this cycle which where CO2 is going up and down. And the interesting part really is that we could actually lower it if we can just like get the biomass from decaying and put it back into the ground. Yeah? So that's how this technology and this solution can work. And of course, there's still lots to do to make this available on a global scale, do some research, and actually market this and find a way that people who are doing this can get paid. Here you see the Keeling curve, or the atmospheric CO2 measured at Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. And that's like one of the reference points for how much CO2 is in the air in the whole world. And the black line, which we usually show, is a moving average. And you see that it's going up all the time. And the interesting curve now for this presentation is the red curve, because that's the yearly variation. So that's all the single points of data. And you see that it's going up and it's going down. And that's basically because of the winter and the summer period. And of course, when there's summer in the north, there's winter in the south, and vice versa. But most of the landmass of the planet is in the north. So it makes really a difference here when in the north, there's a summer and there's a growth period, and then really the curve is going down. But then in autumn and winter, the whole thing is changing again, and the CO2 is rising rapidly. So if we could make there a difference, that we like get all this biomass from decomposing in the winter, That's exactly what we want to achieve by this biomass burial. That's why it actually makes sense to get biomass back into the ground. And also, like from a system perspective, it's quite clear. We have taken carbon from the ground. We have to bring it back into the ground out of the atmosphere in some ways. And the ways we have shown you are really simple. There are other people who are saying, hey, we have to use carbon capture and storage technology as a machine. But all kinds of machines which require or which work to get CO2 out of the air and then into gas form and then like put the gas somewhere are like extremely expensive. They need lots of energy, and then to produce all this energy, you would have to have solar farms and so on. So it's like really, really, really complicated, very money intensive, and so on. It doesn't really make sense. Why? Because hey, we have nature which is really good in capturing CO2 and getting it out of the air. So let's use nature instead of building strange technology to pump a gas into the ground. By the way, it's really dangerous to pump CO2 into the ground, because if there would be any kind of release of CO2, it can kill people. And there have been an incident of, for example, when like CO2 was coming out of a lake, and then I think several hundred or thousands of people were dying. Yeah, and just like to close out here, you see that this is the development where all the CO2 is coming from. These are all the fossil fuel emissions, and you see there only no one way. Fossil fuel emissions are going up. So there are a lot of nations like the United States, for example, who say, hey, drill, baby, drill. And like lots of countries who just earn, like in the Middle East, all their money from fossil fuels. So they are not easily going to give up on drilling and selling that kind of stuff. No, we have to find ways how to make that more expensive. And as at the other hand, get the CO2 back out of the air. Here you see the results. Is like the temperature curve. We had like in 1.55 degrees warming in the year 2024. But you know, this is just the beginning. You see like the temperature is going up over there on the right side since the 1960s. And this is only the beginning. By the way, remember, on land where you actually live, that is not 1.55 degrees. The planet is 70% water. So the water is not heating up that fast. The heating on land is like nearly double. We have some nice statistics about Germany and other countries. Yeah, where you live, it's not 1.55 degrees. It's already like 2.5 to 3 degrees for you because you live on land. And of course, climate change and global warming isn't stopping with these 1.55 degrees. It's going to get worse. You know, what we know from science is that these high levels of CO2 concentration are going to warm up the planet much more in the near future. And as we are going to just pump out more of the stuff all the time, the future doesn't really look bright. Here you see some of the consequences like heat waves. It's global. It's called global warming for a reason. It means it's getting hotter. We just had like in Europe here a heat wave. All kinds of heat records were broken. Flooding, more extreme weather. That's like likely in a lot of areas. There will be more wildfires, and then the fires consume forests. That's bad. Then you lose glaciers, ice, sea level is rising, coral reefs are dying, and these are just some of the issues. So it's already bad. It's going to get worse, and we are on no way to make like a turnaround. It's just getting worse in all directions. So we have another presentation which is like much more in detail about the global warming effects, and that you really understand that the problem is really there. It's much worse than most people think. You know, also me, I thought like some years ago, like 1.5 or 2 degrees warming in Germany. Who cares? It's just like a little bit of temperature, and it's usually too cold here anyway. So, but then I looked like more deeply into this data and was like really surprised. It's getting much worse, and we haven't really touched on all the effects of what's going to come in the future, and that a lot of people don't really tell you the truth. So you want to join, you really want to make a difference. Hey, it's really come and join us on this project. There's lots and lots of work to do. One of our missions is to inform people about the severity of climate change and how bad it's going to be. It's really easy to join. Just join our Discord server and then go and come to an online meeting. Yeah, it's really simple. You have a link here, or you go to reduceco2now.com. You find the links in the description. And join this Discord server, find the event section, come to a recurring meeting, introduce yourself, and then we find and discuss how you can join the project and what would be your tasks and your responsibilities. So thank you very much for watching. And of course, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the features what you can on social media and to support our project. And again, thank you very much for watching. Let's turn climate change around.